As you heard, my name is David Wood, Chair London Futurist. What you're going to hear in the next 20 minutes is in some ways a distilled summary of what I consider to be the best insights of many speakers who have come to London Futurists over the years. If you want to find me online, it's quite easy to do. For example, on Twitter, I am DW2. To be clear, this picture is not of me. It's a picture of a kind of acceleration of AI. Things moving faster and faster, leaving expectations in the dust, or an expectation of an accelerating impact of AI on society. In summary, you ain't seen nothing yet. Before I look at the next 15 years, let's briefly remind ourselves of some of the remarkable changes in the last 15 years. Things that we take for granted now, but which did not exist or barely existed 15 years ago. For example, how many of you had a Facebook account 15 years ago? Only if you had a membership of one or two universities, I guess. People did not get the bulk of their news on Facebook 15 years ago. We did not expect that presidents of the United States would be conducting their business on a microblogging platform called Twitter. YouTube barely existed, but was still in beta in 2005. iPhones did not exist. There were smartphones 15 years ago, as I know well. In the company that I helped co-found, Symbian, we had already launched 10 million smartphones, but now there are, 100 times as many smartphones easily, with more than 100 times as much power and many more than 100 times as much applications. Google Maps barely existed, and certainly there were no phones with built-in GPS signals that we used to navigate around. We did not sit in front of Netflix browsing all day long. We might have gone to Blockbuster instead. We did not get our genes analyzed either partially or completely via 23andMe. And we never heard of Chinese companies such as Tencent, which today are some of the wealthiest and most powerful in the world. The valuation of Tencent is just behind that of Facebook. So what ahead? There are three kinds of scenarios that people have in mind. One is that the kinds of innovation we've had so far will broadly stabilize and we'll see a reasonable state of improvement. Other people say that innovation will dry up. We've already had all the easy pickings and we're getting distracted. We're going to end up in a technology drought, or in a slightly different metaphor, a technology winter. There is another scenario, which is an acceleration of innovation, in which what's coming in the next 15 years will leave the last 15 years of changes in the shade. And that is what I'm going to argue in the next few minutes. I'm going to argue that as the fourth industrial revolution, which I'll define in a moment, gets under full speed, there's going to be a remarkable set of improvements in AI and other technologies. To be clear, the companies on the left are broadly capitalizing on technologies from the third industrial revolution: computing, storage, wireless transmission, with some early aspects of fourth industrial revolution technologies such as deep learning and nanotech and genetic editing. Here are these four industrial revolutions put rather simplistically, but with a grain of truth on a single chart. History has been changed more than anything else by technological change coming out of societies that appreciate to an extent and support to an extent the scientific method, and with an openness to criticize authorities, to criticize prevailing ideas, and openness to the formation of new companies. So we moved in stages. The first industrial revolution got going big time when steam engines were improved and mechanization followed along, in due course railways. Some historians talk about a second industrial revolution in the 1880s with electricity gradually displacing steam, with synthetic chemicals, with fixed line telephones from Alexander Graham Bell, and mass production as in Henry Ford's factories in due course. Some historians trace the third industrial revolution to the start of Silicon Valley, the first silicon integrated circuit in 1959 by Robert Noyce, co-founder at Intel, with precisely one transistor on it. And since then, we've seen the rise of consumer electronics and computers increasingly displacing humans from the workforce. But all of that, I believe, is small scale compared to the NBIC convergence, which is only starting to get going. And let me look briefly at, there's a kind of acceleration here. True, at least in the first order of magnitude. The gaps between the starts of these waves have broadly come down by about 2/3 in each case. It's because of positive feedback cycles driving things forwards, as I'll explain. NBIC is what some radical futurists use as a shorthand for I for infotech, which is not just to compute with bits, not just to store bits or even transmit bits, but to draw insight from bits. Machine learning on big data, generating new kinds of artificial intelligence. Nanotech is manipulating a more smaller levels of atoms than before. We're gradually having smaller and smaller computers, which will eventually give rise to nanobots, nanosensors, in due course quantum computers as well. The B in this stands for, you may guess, biotech, which is the manipulation not of our silicon, but of our biology, our genes, our epigenome, our biome, our proteome, and so forth, which we are increasingly understanding. The C stands for cognotech, understanding what's happening inside our brains and improving and enhancing what's happening in our brains. Of the four revolutions, that's the least advanced of the four, but probably the most profound. The top of this chart is basically hardware, the bottom is software, the left is physics, the right broadly is biology, which is why there are four quadrants. But what's really interesting is the connections between the different quadrants. So as we have better nanotechnology, we have better nanosensors. We can sense with these devices more reliably what's happening inside the brain without having to cut the brain open and drill holes in the skull. As we understand what's happening inside the human mind more, we can copy that into the artificial intelligence and see yet more progress. I've already touched on the fact that AI has had two waves already. The original wave of AI, which dominated the field for a long time, was humans writing down rules taken from experts, so expert lawyers writing down the judgment rules that they followed, and they were captured in computer science. If this, then do this, else do that, rules of grammar, rules of diagnosis, rules about speed limits, and so forth. The other big approach to AI is spotting patterns, which is more just software itself can notice in the way that we humans often notice. Hey, when you have A, you usually get B afterwards. If C is there, it usually means D. So you end up not so much with logical rules, but rules of thumb. So instead of hardwiring from the law, the maximum speed, you can observe what speeds people typically do drive at on various roads, so forth. So the left is sometimes called classical AI, the right is neural networks, because to an extent, it's based on some ideas of what's going on in the brain. The left is sometimes described as explicit reason, the right is sometimes implicit intuition, because the basis for these rules of the thumb is often not particularly obvious. It's opaque. Now, both fields of AI go back a long time, but it was the one on the left which made most of the early running. In as early as 1943, two researchers, Pitts and McCulloch, wrote down mathematics, which they thought would describe what's happening with neurons, with the intention that this could be copied and turned into a new kind of computer. It was interesting It took a long time until 1957 when Frank Rosenblatt from Cornell in New York managed to get a system based on these ideas actually recognizing patterns. It was fairly simple patterns. There was no complex matrix multiplication or similar in what he did, but it did manage to use 2 layers of neural nets, he called them perceptrons, and it did have some conclusions, which led the press at the time to be very excited. But then nothing much happened in this field. Various critics appeared, eminent critics, expert critics, people who did very well in classical AI, who eventually produced a book in 1969 called Perceptrons that said, the reason this stuff isn't making any progress is because it can't make any progress. There are fundamental obstacles to the whole idea. You should focus instead on the basic ideas of classical AI, logical systems bolstered by probabilistic thinking. And the field almost died. Were it not for a few mavericks who ignored what these wise experts, these luminaries of artificial intelligence said, people like the French researcher Yann LeCun, who was finishing his doctorate in Paris in 1985. He's still very much active in the field. Most of you will know he is one of the leading lights of AI in Facebook. He managed to get more complicated systems than Minsky or Papert conceived, not just single layers, but multiple layers, and could do something commercially significant with them. He had software that could read digits, handwritten digits, something of great interest to banks as they're trying to automate the processing of checks. So you can try and read these digits with rules that try and cater for every possibility. If there's a loop and there's a line, then it might mean it's a 6 unless it's like this, in which case it's a 9, except if this. Very complicated. Yann LeCun and his colleagues said, no, we're just going to try to get pattern recognition, taking inputs, lots of numbers, massive arrays of digits. So you take each of these, you put them on a grid, you divide it up into what, 28 by 28, that's 784 values, black, white, and gray, and you try and figure out what sets of neural networks to come out in due course with 10 numbers each time, the probability that you're seeing a 5, a 6, and so on. And he got it to work pretty well. So the field did not die, and there were still some mavericks who took more interest. It turned out, however, it still took a long time before the field broke through. It turns out that for this kind of pattern recognition to work, you need lots of computing power, more than people had expected. It turns out, of course, that we did get lots of computing power in the following years. Not only CPUs, the central processing units, but also GPUs, which are the graphics processing units, which were popularized by teenagers and older teenagers playing graphics games. And it turns out you need lots and lots and lots of data, which is labeled. Well, it also turned out that by a few more years, there was big data. And that enabled some of these systems to be more productive. There were improvements in the design of the method as well, including improvements to the layering and adjustments that took place. And in recent years, this has shot up and up and up. People have calculated that since 2012, the number of computations to train models has doubled every 3.5 months, which is a lot faster than the doubling of Moore's law for semiconductors. I'm going to try and clear my screen. I seem to have got a couple of lines on it. I'm not sure how to do that. Let me try and clear all this. No, maybe I can't do it. We'll have to put up with these lines on the screen. Can I shift this around? I'm not sure if you're seeing these lines on the screen or not. Someone has annotated the screen, right?
Yes, we do see them.
It's not me, I don't think. Not intentionally. Some AI is gradually taking over. So what was I saying? I was saying that the systems that was doing pattern recognition gradually and then suddenly got better and better. And so that by 2012, you could point pictures like this at deep learning systems called neural image caption generators, and they would come up with answers. A group of young people playing a game of frisbee, something better than people had expected could ever be possible, something that many theorists had said would be forever impossible, that you'd never get computers with that kind of understanding. Other pictures like this, the same software said this is a person riding a motorcycle on a dirt road. And we've talked about the elephant in the Zoom room. The software in this case detected this as a herd of elephants walking across a dry grass field. Should that impress you? Well, not really, because you'd want to know the statistics. I might just have picked out the 3 most promising examples, and after all, there were some spectacular mistakes too. What should impress you more is the systems that were tested on an annual basis at the LSVRC competition, the Large Scale Vision Recognition Challenge, which took place every year from 2010 to 2017. In this case, software was presented by large numbers of pictures and asked in each time to pick the right caption out of a choice of 5. When this competition started, it was quite good. It was getting about 3 in 4 correct. But then in 2012, one team from Canada started using deep learning and got much better results than anybody had expected. And from then on, every team was using variants of deep learning, and the results got better and better to what we might even call superhuman level. Stop sharing screen and reshare. Let me try that. Let's stop the share. Aha. Let's share the screen again. Let's hope it continues. Thanks everybody. So hopefully I won't unintentionally animate anymore. Thanks for your patience. So this was impressive. Even more impressive is what's going on in these pictures as reported in Nature and also in The Guardian at the start of the year, in which there are pictures you can see of mammograms, and what's in the yellow boxes, it's cancer tumor, which AI detected, but which was previously missed by 6 different human radiologists. Should this impress you? Well, again, you'll probably ask, what about the statistics? Well, the statistics are that this software was trained on 91,000 mammograms from the US and the UK. In each case, the software had access to whether there was a tumor there or not, as was validated in the years following. And then it was tested on 30,000 other mammograms. And of these, it missed 9.4% fewer tumors than the humans in the US. Is that impressive? Well, you might also bear in mind that there are 2 kinds of errors you can get in this test. You can miss tumors that were there, but you can also make the corresponding or the opposite mistake of raising a false alarm unnecessarily. Sometimes these are called type 1 and type 2 errors, and most software up till recently which did well on one did badly on the other. The reason there was all the fanfare about this particular one is that the software got both sets of error less than the humans. AI system outperforms experts in spotting breast cancer. Truly useful, can really save lives. So to summarize what I've said so far, there are successive new waves of AI. This green line shows classical AI growing slowly based on expert systems. This blue line shows the growth of neural networks and deep learning through its long period of going nowhere and being subject to denial and criticism by experts in the field, and eventually because of big data and GPUs breaking through substantially in 2012, and then going from strength to strength so that we nowadays look at classical AI and often call it good old-fashioned AI. But I'm really concerned about what's happening next. Another wave. And this wave might be strong enough, despite people denying it is possible, that we'll look back soon on today's deep learning and say, well, that was rather quaint, good old-fashioned deep learning. So let me look at this next wave and briefly pose and try to answer 4 questions. Why do I think this will happen? What will it consist of? When might it happen? And so what? What should we do about this possibility? Starting with why, and a lot of it comes down to money. Lots and lots and lots of money. The leading companies of the world by share price valuation nearly all define themselves as being an AI company or a company very focused on AI. The CEO of Google says they are no longer a search company, they are an artificial intelligence company. But it's not just the biggest companies, it's companies in almost every field are looking to develop and take advantage of AI for significant financial gains. Whether it's trading algorithms, whether it's writing games, that's a huge market, of course, which games can be more attractive if they have AI characters with a surprising degree of AI, customer support agents that go beyond the often frustrating and mind-numbing aspects of today's chatbots, improved interaction design, faster healthcare research and development. I've just come off a conference on AI in healthcare. It is huge business. Use of AI to go in new directions in music and art, and even to have new engineering designs or scientific theories. Today, it has done new engineering designs, which have often surprised and impressed human engineers. It hasn't done much yet in terms of new science, but I don't think that's too far away. So you may have heard the phrase, software is eating the world by Mark Andreessen. The person who said that, pointing out that whichever field of industry you're in, unless you're on top of software, you are likely to lose out. Well, the new phrase is software written by AI is going to eat the world. And that's why so many more companies are investing as fast as they can in terms of that. There are also bad guys, we can call them that, who are trying to take advantage of AI too. The crime industry, if we can call it that, is enormous with a very large budget. They're not, of course, audited, but they are increasingly using features of AI in their malware. The antivirus people are using AI to try and suss out which malware is malware and which is not. And there's an arms race there, just as there's also a real world arms race in terms of defense systems and attack systems, which are both using AI to try and get leverage. So there's not only commercial competition, there is political competition to improve AI. Vladimir Putin, very bright guy, was asked recently about artificial intelligence at a conference. He said it's the future, not only for Russia, for all of humankind. It comes with colossal opportunities, but also threats that are difficult to predict. And then in an almost off-the-cuff answer, he said, whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world. And that's a real Sputnik moment if people are listening. Because I don't know about you, but I don't want Vladimir Putin, despite his many good qualities, to be the ruler of the world. There was another Sputnik moment when something that people had insisted could not be done for the foreseeable future, software mastery over humans in the venerable game of Go, that people said until quite recently that this was at least 20 years into the future. AI researchers tended to say it was 10 years in the future. Games practitioners tended to think they had a 20-year lead. But then Google's DeepMind got involved in the field and unexpectedly, comprehensively beat the best human player 4-1, famously. And that was a Sputnik moment. Not so much for us in the West, because we didn't pay too much attention, but in the countries of Japan, Korea, and China, where Go is revered as ineffable and was thought to be beyond the capabilities of software, oh my goodness. It was something that Western software was beating. And so China in particular has redoubled its research in AI since then. People who look at the bookcase of Xi Jinping have noticed, alongside books by Marx and Lenin and Mao and Hemingway and Homer and Dickens have noticed the master algorithm by computer science professor Pedro Domingos, and augmented life in the smart lane by New York futurist Brett King. They are taking this very seriously. So why do I expect rapid improvements? Because of commercial pressures, political pressures. More people are going to wake up to the possibilities. There are unprecedented numbers of people in this field, access to unprecedented amounts of online info, and they can use today's AI and deep learning to help them create new kinds of artificial intelligence and deep learning. A bit like the Industrial Revolution took off in speed when machines were able to build better tools, which were able to build better machines, which are able to build better tools. The third industrial revolution saw computers, which were initially slow and difficult to design and manufacture, but using the disciplines of computer-aided design, computer-aided manufacturing, each generation of computer can help to design better computers. It's the same with software. Single groups or small groups of software engineers can take advantage of very powerful software tools to write even more powerful software. And it's going to be the same with AI. Many things that people say today, oh, it's slow and difficult, can be improved and speeded up by the use of AI tools. And we're going to see this positive feedback cycle. Briefly, what's in this next wave? I can't say for sure because I don't know which of these breakthroughs are going to turn out to be most significant, but we can look at generative adversarial networks, artificial emotional intelligence, evolutionary algorithms, biologically inspired AI. And by the way, many of the largest AI companies have a significant number of their PhDs with PhDs in neuroscience rather than computing science. AI that infers causation, as Judea Perrell talks about in his very interesting book, The Book of Why. We might get big leaps up when we find out how to connect simple AI together in more profound ways, as SingularityNet is doing. Or there's the whole field of transfer learning, which is going to be my final remarks, which was exemplified again by what happened next with Google's DeepMind. After they had a version that beat the best human player, E. Sedol, the team kept thinking and they figured out they could go better. Rather than being trained by being fed all the best believed games by human experts, they tweaked the algorithm so it taught itself with no examples at all. AlphaGo 0, tabula rasa. Instead of having two quite complicated intertwined deep learning networks, they managed to change it around. The original one got better slowly over a year. I say slowly, of course, it's amazing how quickly it improved over a year. The new one started training itself, and the team who were watching it from the outside figured out that within 3 days, it was already probably as good as the original. So they played the two against each other in 100 matches, and the old one, which had beaten the best humans, won no games in that match. The new one won 100. And by the way, the new one was running on slower hardware as well. Obviously, when it was trained, it used enormous resources, but once it had been trained, it was more effective. Where the transfer learning comes in is what happens next. The team created a new version of this, which didn't know the rules of Go, but took the rules instead of other games, such as shogi, Japanese chess. So still building a lot of the algorithms from before. It just took 2 hours training before it was able to beat comprehensively the best ever software to play Japanese chess. It didn't win all the games, but it won the majority. And then they took on the grandmother of all games in the sense that for 60 years, for 70 years, computer scientists had been figuring out how to play chess via software. But within just 4 hours of training, the new software beat Stockfish quite comprehensively. Didn't lose a single game. It didn't have an opening book. It figured out all the opening theory by itself. It figured out all the strategic theories by itself in just 4 hours. It was searching a lot of moves, but by no means as many as Stockfish. It had a better intuition from its training as to what should be searched. And human chess experts who look at this say that this is amazing. It's like chess from another dimension, transfer learning. When is this going to happen? Well, nobody knows. Nobody knows. Because, of course, it depends on what strength these various new breakthroughs will take place. I just urge that people keep an open mind, prepared to be surprised. If I had to make a bet, I'd say there's a 10% chance of major changes in the field as early as 2025, a 50% chance of general AI by 2050, and be skeptical of dogmatic skeptics. You may hear a lot of denial by people who are very vested in current AI trajectories, but bear in mind there were experts who were wrongly in denial in the past. And there are many reasons to discuss claims about AI, which I don't have time to look at. That brings us to the so what question, which I'm not going to answer because that is for the remainder of this debate. But I will say you ain't seen nothing yet in terms of the growing power of AI, and you ain't seen nothing yet in terms of the contributions of thought that the debaters are going to bring to this discussion. Thank you very much.